For most people, childhood memories are birthday parties, family vacations, and embarrassing school photos. For me, childhood was watching my parents treat my older brother like a national investment project. If he brought home a B+, my parents reacted like he'd solved world hunger. If I brought home straight A's, they'd nod and ask whether I'd remembered to take the trash out. My brother wasn't a bad person. That's important to understand. He never demanded special treatment. He simply floated through life on a cloud of parental worship, while I stood underneath getting rained on. When he announced he wanted to attend a prestigious university, my parents practically started throwing money at him. Tuition? Covered. Housing? Covered. Textbooks? Covered. Study abroad semester in Europe? Apparently essential for his education. Over the years, they spent nearly $180,000 on his degrees. Yes, degrees. Plural. Every Thanksgiving became an annual celebration of my brother's academic career. He's going to do amazing things. He's the future of this family. Our investment will pay off one day. I used to sit there wondering if I was invisible, or if they simply thought I was furniture. Then came my turn. I wasn't asking for a luxury education. I wasn't requesting a trip across Europe to discover myself. I just wanted help paying for community college. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table with my acceptance letter. My mother smiled sympathetically. "We'd love to help." My father nodded. "But there's just no money left." No money left. The same people who had spent enough on my brother's education to purchase a small house suddenly couldn't contribute a few $1,000s toward mine. They suggested student loans. They suggested part-time jobs. They suggested building character. Apparently character was only necessary for one child. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Okay. That single word shocked them more than any argument would have. I think they expected tears. They expected guilt. What they got was acceptance. Because in that moment I realized something important. Nobody was coming to save me. So I got a job. Then another. Then a third. During the day I attended classes. At night I worked. On weekends I worked more. Meanwhile my parents continued celebrating every milestone in my brother's academic journey. When he completed a semester, they hosted a family dinner. When he completed a year, they hosted a bigger family dinner. When he completed another degree, you'd think he'd personally negotiated peace between nations. One Christmas, my father actually stood up and gave a speech about my brother's educational achievements. I had quietly earned an academic award the same week. Nobody mentioned it. Not even once. The funny thing was that the unfair treatment eventually stopped hurting. After enough repetition, favoritism becomes background noise. You stop expecting fairness. You stop chasing approval. You focus on surviving. That was around the time I met someone who completely changed my perspective. He was working part-time while trying to launch a small online business. We met during a local networking event that mostly consisted of exhausted people pretending they knew what they were doing. Unlike everyone else, he didn't ask where I went to school. He asked what I wanted to build. It was the first time someone seemed interested in my future instead of comparing it to my brother's. We spent hours talking. Then days. Then weeks. Our conversations became the best part of my schedule. When I explained my business idea, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me to be realistic. He didn't explain why it wouldn't work. Instead, he grinned and asked, "So when do we start?" It felt strange having someone believe in me. My parents certainly didn't. When they heard I was trying to build an online business, they reacted exactly as expected. My father laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. My mother called it a cute hobby. My brother politely suggested I keep my expectations low. I thanked them for the advice. Then I ignored every word. Because while they were celebrating another one of my brother's expensive degrees, I was quietly building something of my own. Something nobody had paid for. Something nobody had handed to me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval. I only needed a chance. and I was finally creating one for myself. Several years passed, and something fascinating happened. My brother collected degrees the way some people collect refrigerator magnets. Every time I saw him, he seemed to have another diploma. A bachelor's degree became a master's degree. A master's degree became a second master's degree. At one point I genuinely lost track. Family gatherings turned into educational museum tours. My parents would proudly display framed certificates around the house. Visitors were practically forced to admire them. Meanwhile, my own life was becoming unexpectedly interesting. The tiny online business my boyfriend and I had started was no longer tiny. At first, it had been two exhausted people working from a cramped apartment, surviving on instant noodles and optimism. Neither of us knew exactly what we were doing. One memorable week, we accidentally shipped 27 orders to the wrong state. Another time, we launched a marketing campaign with a typo so embarrassing that customers started buying products just to make fun of us. We laughed through every disaster. And somehow, despite our mistakes, the company kept growing. What made the difference wasn't money. It wasn't connections. It was having someone beside me who genuinely believed we could figure things out. Whenever I wanted to quit, he refused to let me. Whenever he doubted himself, I pushed him forward. Somewhere between late-night planning sessions and endless coffee runs, our business partnership became something much deeper. We fell in love without either of us noticing exactly when it happened. One day we were discussing inventory management. The next day we were arguing over which side of the bed belonged to whom. Life has a funny way of accelerating when you're building something together. Within a few years, we moved into a beautiful home. The company expanded. Employees joined. Revenue increased. Then increased again. Eventually, the business became successful enough that financial stress disappeared entirely. Ironically, my parents never noticed. In their defense, they never really asked. Whenever family members spoke to me, they automatically assumed I was still struggling. My mother would occasionally hand me coupons. My father once offered advice on how to save money by making coffee at home. I thanked him while silently remembering that my company had earned more that month than his annual salary. The funniest moment happened during one family barbecue. My brother spent nearly 20 minutes explaining the importance of career planning. Then he casually mentioned applying for a position at a rapidly growing company. My boyfriend nearly inhaled his hamburger, trying not to laugh. Because the company my brother was praising? I owned it. Completely. My brother didn't even recognize the name. Apparently he had submitted his application without researching who founded the business. I considered telling him. Then decided the universe was doing comedy better than I ever could. To be fair, my brother wasn't lazy. He simply struggled to translate all those expensive degrees into a stable career. Job after job failed to work out. Some employers thought he was overqualified. Others thought he lacked practical experience. The situation became increasingly awkward because my parents continued bragging about their educational investment. Every promotion I earned went unnoticed. Every company milestone was ignored. Meanwhile, my brother changing departments somehow became breaking news. Then he met the woman who would eventually become his fiancée. She was smart, funny, confident. Most importantly, she paid attention. Unlike everyone else, she asked questions. Real questions. Not just about college or degrees. About life. About work. About people. The first time we met, she spent 10 minutes talking with me and immediately noticed something strange. She couldn't understand why nobody in the family seemed interested in what I did. A few months later, she discovered the truth entirely by accident. She saw an interview featuring me and our company. The look on her face afterward was apparently priceless. According to my brother, she spent an entire evening trying to convince him that his sister was secretly far more successful than anyone realized. He thought she was exaggerating. She wasn't. From that moment forward, she treated me differently. Not because of money. Not because of status. But because she respected the journey. When their wedding planning started, we became surprisingly close friends. I genuinely liked her. She made my brother happy. And unlike the rest of my family, she never measured people's worth by diplomas hanging on walls. As wedding preparations intensified, costs started spiraling out of control. Venues, catering, decorations, photographers, everything seemed determined to become more expensive overnight. The couple became stressed. Especially my future sister-in-law. She wanted a beautiful wedding but hated watching every decision become a financial argument. That's when I quietly decided to help. Not for recognition. Not for revenge. Simply because she deserved support. The kind of support I had always wished someone would give me. So while my parents continued bragging about the $180,000 they'd invested in my brother's future, I quietly invested in something far more important. The beginning of his future family. And nobody at the time had the slightest idea how dramatically that decision would change everything. The wedding was exactly the kind of event my parents loved. Elegant venue. Expensive decorations. Perfect lighting. Enough flowers to make it look like a botanical garden had exploded indoors. Every detail screamed money. Which was funny, considering my parents still believed I was barely surviving financially. As guests arrived, my father transformed into his favorite version of himself, proud father of the golden child. I hadn't even finished my first drink before I overheard him telling strangers about my brother's academic achievements. Again. The degrees alone cost nearly $180,000. He said it with the pride of a man announcing he'd personally built the pyramids. My mother wasn't much different. She spent most of the cocktail hour explaining how much sacrifice had gone into supporting my brother's education. Apparently every dollar had been worth it. I exchanged a glance with my boyfriend. He nearly laughed into his glass. Meanwhile, the groom looked nervous. The bride looked excited. And I was genuinely happy for both of them. Despite everything, this wasn't a day for family drama. At least that's what I thought. The reception began smoothly. Dinner was served. Guests mingled. Music played. For several wonderful hours, nobody discussed college degrees. Then came the speeches. Friends shared stories. Relatives offered advice. The usual wedding traditions unfolded exactly as expected. Finally, the bride stood to deliver her toast. Everyone quieted down. A large screen behind her lit up. She had prepared a slideshow filled with photos from their relationship. Cute pictures. Vacation memories. Engagement photos. Normal wedding stuff. At least that was the plan. Instead, the screen displayed a spreadsheet. A very detailed spreadsheet. A spreadsheet containing wedding expenses. The room became silent. The bride frowned. That's not supposed to be up there. Someone near the projector started pressing buttons. Unfortunately, every button seemed to make things worse. The spreadsheet enlarged. Now everyone could read it. Every single line item. Venue payments. Catering payments. Photography payments. Decoration costs. And next to nearly half the entries appeared one recurring name. Mine. At first nobody understood what they were looking at. Then the whispers started. Guests began leaning closer. People pointed at the screen. My mother squinted. My father adjusted his glasses. The bride turned around and immediately froze. Oh. That single word told me everything. She knew exactly what was happening. The groom looked at the screen. Then at me. Then back at the screen. His eyes widened. Oh no. Unfortunately, things were only getting started. One of the bride's cousins accidentally clicked another file. A second spreadsheet appeared. This one contained payment summaries. Totals. Transfers. Financial breakdowns. The amount I'd contributed was impossible to miss. The room erupted into confused murmuring. My father looked like someone had unplugged his brain. What is this? He asked. The bride nervously laughed. Well, I guess the surprise is out. The groom buried his face in his hands. Guests immediately became interested. What surprise? What does this mean? Who paid for that? Questions flew across the room. The bride attempted damage control. Unfortunately, she had inherited the same public speaking instincts as a hand grenade. She kept making everything worse. I just wanted to thank someone who helped us when wedding costs got difficult. The crowd looked around. Then back at the giant screen displaying my name repeatedly. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. An aunt dropped her fork. My mother slowly turned toward me. You paid for this? I shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. That answer caused more chaos than the spreadsheet. Because normal people don't describe financing nearly half a wedding as not a big deal. The bride tried explaining. She mentioned my company. Then she mentioned its growth. Then she mentioned a few numbers. The room exploded. Suddenly every relative wanted details. Every guest wanted answers. My father looked physically ill. My mother appeared trapped between confusion and disbelief. The funniest part came from one of my uncles. He stood up, stared at my brother, then stared at me. After several seconds of silence, he pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Another guest asked. I'm calculating return on investment. The entire table burst into laughter. My brother nearly fell out of his chair. The uncle continued typing. Let's see. One child received $180,000 and multiple degrees. He pointed toward my brother. Other child received absolutely nothing and somehow paid for half the wedding. Now he pointed toward me. The laughter doubled. Another relative joined in. Can educational investments be returned for store credit? Even the bride started laughing. The groom was laughing. My boyfriend was laughing. At this point, half the reception was openly roasting my parents. Years of family frustration were finally finding oxygen. People remembered every instance of favoritism. Every comparison. Every ridiculous speech about the golden child. The stories started flowing. One cousin reminded everyone about the time my parents framed one of my brother's report cards. Another relative mentioned how they'd forgotten my college graduation entirely. The crowd became a comedy club. And my parents were the headline act. For the first time in my life, nobody was buying the narrative they'd spent years creating. The spotlight had shifted. The truth was sitting in plain view on a giant projection screen. And there wasn't a single thing anyone could do to hide it. It took several minutes before the laughter finally settled down. The bride was still standing at the microphone, shaking her head and laughing at the disaster unfolding around her. I guess this isn't exactly the toast I planned, she said. That earned another round of chuckles from the guests. The giant spreadsheet was finally removed from the screen, but honestly, the damage had already been done. Or maybe the truth had finally been done. There was a difference. The bride took a deep breath and looked directly at me. Since everyone already knows, I might as well tell the rest of the story. The room immediately became quiet again. She explained how wedding expenses had started overwhelming them. How she and my brother had been cutting things from their budget every week. How they were trying to avoid starting their marriage under financial pressure. Then she explained how I had quietly stepped in. No conditions. No expectations. No public recognition. Just help. The kind of help family members are supposed to give each other. The kind of support I'd never received myself. She looked around the room. What impressed me wasn't the money. Her voice softened. It was the fact that she never once tried to make anyone feel guilty. Several guests nodded. My parents stared at the floor. The bride continued. Most people who overcome difficult circumstances become bitter. She became generous. That one landed hard. Hard enough that nobody spoke for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. My brother stood up. For years he'd been the center of attention in our family. The golden child. The investment. The future. But now he looked strangely relieved. Like someone finally setting down a heavy suitcase. He walked toward the microphone. The room watched silently. I think I need to say something. He glanced at me. Then at our parents. Then back at the guests. My entire life I've been told I was the smart one. The room remained silent. But looking back, I think everyone was measuring the wrong things. My father looked stunned. My mother looked close to tears. My brother continued. I had support. I had opportunities. I had resources. Then he pointed toward me. She had obstacles. That sentence hit the room harder than any joke had. Because everyone knew it was true. He laughed softly. I spent years collecting degrees. The guest smiled. My sister built a company. More laughter. I got $180,000. Now the entire room was grinning. She got motivational speeches about character. The laughter became deafening. Even I couldn't stop laughing. For the first time in years, my brother wasn't competing with me. He was standing beside me. The bride reclaimed the microphone. And before anyone forgets, someone else deserves credit. She pointed directly toward my boyfriend. The spotlight immediately found him. His face displayed the pure panic of a man who had not signed up for public attention. The guests laughed. The bride smiled. This man spent years believing in her before anyone else did. More applause followed. She continued. He worked beside her. He supported her. He encouraged her. Then she grinned mischievously. If universities handed out degrees for patience, he'd have at least 3. The room erupted again. My boyfriend buried his face in his hands while everyone applauded. I reached over and squeezed his hand. After everything we'd built together, that moment somehow meant more than any business achievement. Because success feels different when shared. Eventually my parents approached our table. For once, neither seemed to have a prepared speech. No lectures. No excuses. No comparisons. Just silence. My mother spoke first. We were wrong. Simple. Direct. Years overdue. My father nodded. We should have treated you better. I looked at both of them. The younger version of me would have cried. She would have demanded explanations. She would have wanted justice. But that version of me no longer existed. Years of hard work had changed her. I smiled. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the past had disappeared. But because I no longer needed what they'd withheld. Their approval. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. Both of them looked surprised. Then I added the truth. I stopped needing your permission to succeed years ago. Neither parent had a response. Because there wasn't one. The sentence wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was simply true. The rest of the evening became surprisingly fun. Guests kept stopping by our table. Relatives shared stories. People laughed about the spreadsheet incident. My uncle proudly announced that his return on investment calculations had become the highlight of the wedding. Another relative started calling me the family's best investment. The nickname spread frighteningly fast. By the end of the night, half the reception was using it. Even the groom joined in. At one point he raised his glass and announced that future family gatherings should include a scholarship fund named after his sister. The guests cheered. The bride laughed. My parents groaned. And honestly, it was perfect. As the evening came to an end, I stood beside the man who had believed in me when nobody else did. Across the room stood my brother and his new wife beginning their future together. For the first time in years, our family felt strangely honest. Not perfect. Not magically repaired. Just honest. And that was enough. Because in the end, success wasn't about proving my parents wrong. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building a life so fulfilling that their doubts no longer mattered. They spent $180,000 trying to create a success story. What they never understood was that determination, resilience, and a little faith in yourself are worth far more than any tuition bill. And thanks to one accidental wedding toast, everyone finally understood it too.